I've always believed that the past is a different country, one we leave behind once we cross the border into a new life. But standing in that mahogany road office of Monday morning, I realized my past hadn't just followed me, it had arrived early and was waiting for me to take a seat. My new boss didn't just know my resume, he knew things that weren't on any piece of paper. He knew the secrets I thought I'd buried a decade ago. How is that even possible? Stick around because this story gets stranger with every passing hour. Before we dive into the mystery, please hit that subscribe button and join our community. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. What do you do for a living? And have you ever had a creepy or unexplainable encounter at your workplace? Let's get into it. The corporate world in Chicago is a sea of charcoal suits and lukewarm coffee. At 42, I had finally carved out a space for myself as a senior compliance officer at Miller & Associates. It was a safe job, boring even, and that was exactly how I liked it. After the chaotic energy of my 20s, boring felt like a luxury. I arrived at 8 a.m., organized my spreadsheets, and left at 5 p.m. to spend time with my golden retriever and a glass of Chardonnay. But the stability of my world shifted when our department head retired, and a man named Julian Vane was brought in from the East Coast to take the reins. The rumors preceded him. Vane was described as a wonderkind of corporate restructuring, a man with an uncanny ability to see through people and balance sheets alike. When I walked into his office for our introductory one-on-one, I expected the usual corporate platitudes, a handshake, a brief discussion about KPIs, and a polite, "let's work together." Instead, Julian Vane didn't even look up from his tablet when I entered. He let me stand there for a full 30 seconds, the silence stretching like a thin wire between us. When he finally looked up, his eyes weren't cold, they were intensely familiar. "Allison Vance," he said, his voice a smooth baritone. Or should I say, Lexi? The air left my lungs as if I'd been punched in the solar plexus. Lexi was a name I hadn't heard in 12 years. It was the name I used when I worked for Elite Companionship Services during my late 20s, a high-end agency where I accompanied wealthy executives to galas, fundraisers, and private dinners. It wasn't illegal, but it was a world I had scrubbed from my history. I never put it on a LinkedIn profile. I never told my friends at the firm. I had even moved cities to ensure that version of me stayed dead. "I'm sorry," I managed to stammer, my heart hammering against my ribs. "My name is Allison. I'm not sure who Lexi is." Julian leaned back in his leather chair, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. "Of course, my mistake. It's just, you look remarkably like someone I saw at a charity auction in the Hamptons back in 2014. She had a penchant for vintage Chanel and a very specific way of ordering a dry martini. 3 olives, never 2. Remarkable coincidence, wouldn't you say?" I felt a cold sweat prickling at my hairline. I did order my martinis that way, and I had worn a vintage Chanel gown to the Hamptons auction he was referring to. I tried to maintain my professional mask, but my hands were trembling beneath the edge of the desk. He was testing me, but why, and how did he know? "I've never been to the Hamptons, Mr. Vane," I lied, my voice sounding thin to my own ears. "Now, regarding the third quarter compliance reports—" "We'll get to the reports, Allison," he interrupted, emphasizing my name as if it were an inside joke. "I just like to know who I'm working with. I find that people's hidden histories often dictate their future performance. For instance, someone with a background in social navigation might be much better at handling difficult clients than a standard analyst. Don't you agree?" I spent the rest of the meeting in a daze, nodding at his directives while my mind raced. Was he a client from back then? I scanned his face, searching for a spark of recognition, but nothing clicked. He looked to be in his mid-40s, handsome in a sharp, angular way, but I didn't remember him. The agency had been very discreet. We were ghosts in beautiful dresses. How could he possibly have connected Allison the auditor to Lexi the socialite? The following week was a slow descent into paranoia. Every time I walked past Julian's office, I felt his eyes on me. He didn't say anything overt, but he dropped breadcrumbs constantly. During a staff meeting about our new digital security protocols, he looked directly at me and said, Digital footprints are nearly impossible to erase, isn't that right, Allison? No matter how many times you change your name or your city, the data remains. It's all about knowing where to look. The other staff members nodded, thinking he was talking about cyber insurance. I knew he was talking to me. I started staying late, not to work, but to look into him. Who was Julian Vane? His digital footprint was impeccably clean. Too clean. Ivy League education, a decade at a top-tier firm in New York, a few board positions. There were no scandals, no photos of him at the high-end parties I used to frequent. One evening, around 6:30 p.m., I was the last one in the office, or so I thought. I was staring at a photo of Julian on the company website, trying to place him, when I heard a soft knock on my cubicle wall. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was Julian. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, and his sleeves were rolled up, revealing a small, faded tattoo on his inner wrist, a compass rose. "Still here, Allison?" he asked. "Dedication is a rare trait, or perhaps you're just looking for something you can't find." "Just finishing some filings," I said, quickly closing the browser tab. "You know," he said, leaning against the partition, "I noticed you didn't list your time in New York on your official CV. You jumped from your degree in Oregon straight to a small firm in Chicago. There's a 4-year gap there. Most people would call that a sabbatical, but I have a feeling you were very busy during those years." I felt cornered. "I dealt with some family issues. It wasn't relevant to my professional career." "Family issues," he repeated, his tone mocking. "Is that what we're calling it?" I remember a night at the Waldorf Astoria. A girl named Lexi helped a very drunk CEO navigate a potential PR nightmare by quietly escorting him out the back entrance before the press arrived. She was brilliant, calm under pressure, tactful. That kind of family issue is actually a very valuable skill set in compliance. I stood up, my chair screeching against the floor. "Mr. Vane, I don't know what you're implying, but if you have a problem with my work, please take it to HR. Otherwise, I'd appreciate it if we kept our conversations focused on the firm." Julian didn't flinch. He just watched me with those piercing eyes. "I don't have a problem with your work, Allison. In fact, I think you're the best person for a very specific project I'm working on, but I need to know I can trust you, and trust is built on honesty." He turned and walked away, leaving me shaking. He wasn't just guessing, he was there. He saw me at the Waldorf, but I still couldn't remember him. Was he the CEO? No, he was too young. Was he a waiter? A bodyguard? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my ghost life wasn't as invisible as I thought. That night, I went home and did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled a dusty box out from the back of my closet. Inside were the remnants of Lexi, a pair of Louboutins I couldn't bring myself to throw away, a silver cigarette case I never used, and a stack of old invitations. I went through them one by one, looking for his name. Nothing. I went through my old emails, the burner account I used for the agency. I searched for Julian Vane Compass. Nothing. I started to wonder if I was being stalked. Had he targeted this company because I was here, or was it a horrific coincidence? The fear was starting to bleed into my sleep. I dreamt of gala ballrooms where everyone wore masks, and when I tried to take mine off, my skin came with it. I realized I couldn't keep living like this. I needed to know what he wanted, or I needed to quit. But quitting would look like an admission of guilt, and I had worked too hard for this career to let a ghost from my past haunt me out of it. The project Julian mentioned turned out to be an internal audit of our high-net-worth clients. He assigned me to lead it, which meant I had access to the most sensitive files in the company. It felt like a trap. If I found something, would he use my past to silence me? If I found nothing, would he claim I was incompetent? On Wednesday, he called me into his office to check on my progress. This time, the atmosphere was different. He had a bottle of expensive scotch on his desk and 2 glasses.
"Sit down, Allison," he said. It wasn't a request. I sat. "I'm on the clock, Mr. Vane. I don't drink during work hours." "It's 5:15. The sun is over the yardarm somewhere," he said, pouring a small amount into both glasses. He pushed one toward me. "Tell me, do you remember a man named Marcus Thorne?" The name hit me like a bucket of ice water. Marcus Thorne was the owner of the agency I worked for. He was a shadow figure, someone who handled the contracts and took 40% of the cut. I had only met him twice, and both times the meetings were held in dimly lit offices where I felt more like a commodity than a human being. "I've heard the name in the news," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Real estate mogul, right?" "Among other things," Julian said. "He also ran a very lucrative hospitality business, one that specialized in placing intelligent, beautiful women in the company of powerful men. He called them consultants, but we both know what they were." "I don't know why you're telling me this," I said, my heart drumming a frantic rhythm. "Because Marcus Thorne is dead," Julian said flatly. "He died 2 months ago, and when a man like that dies, he leaves behind a lot of, let's call them sensitive records, client lists, payment ledgers, photos. He was a blackmailer, Allison. That was his real business. The agency was just the delivery system." I felt the room spinning. I knew Thorne was sleazy, but blackmail? I had just been a girl trying to pay off my student loans and live a life I couldn't afford. I never saw any blackmail. "I have those records, Allison," Julian continued, leaning forward. "All of them. I spent a lot of money to ensure they didn't fall into the wrong hands. And do you know what I found in the V file? A very detailed account of a young woman named Lexi. She was his star. She was discreet, she was sharp, and she never asked questions. Thorne kept a very close eye on her. He even followed her when she tried to leave the business." "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered. "Are you trying to blackmail me too?" Julian laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Blackmail you? For what? A few dinners and a fake name? No, Allison, I don't want your money, and I don't want to ruin your life. I'm telling you this because Thorne's records show that he had a silent partner, someone who is still very much alive and very much interested in keeping Thorne's legacy of information gathering alive, someone who is currently a client of this firm." He slid a file across the desk. It was the name of a man I had just started auditing, a man named Robert Sterling. Sterling was Thorne's financier, and he's using this firm to launder the proceeds from his own version of the agency. I didn't come here to haunt you, Allison. I came here to find Sterling's paper trail, and I need someone who knows how the game is played to help me find it. I chose you because you're the only one in this building who understands the world Sterling operates in. You know the language. You know the red flags. I looked at the file, then back at Julian. The fear was still there, but it was being eclipsed by a cold, hard anger. My past wasn't just a secret, it was a weapon someone else had been holding over my head without me even knowing it. "You knew all this," I said. "The martini, the dress, the Waldorf. You weren't just guessing, you were studying my file." "I was," he admitted. "I had to be sure you were the same person, and I had to see how you'd react under pressure. If you had crumbled, I couldn't have used you. But you didn't. You lied to my face with the grace of a seasoned diplomat. That's exactly what I need."
The partnership with Julian was uneasy, to say the least. For the next 2 weeks, we worked in a state of high-tension collaboration. By day, we were the perfect corporate team. By night, we were digital archaeologists, digging through Sterling's convoluted network of shell companies and consulting fees. The deeper we went, the more I realized Julian was right. Sterling hadn't just financed Thorne, he had expanded the operation. He was using high-end events to gather leverage on politicians, judges, and CEOs. My role at Miller & Associates wasn't a coincidence. Sterling had likely influenced my hiring years ago, keeping me close in case he ever needed a fixer who already knew the stakes. The thought that my safe career was just another cage built by the same people I'd tried to escape made me nauseous. "Look at this," I said one night, pointing to a series of wire transfers to a catering company in the Caymans. "The amounts are too consistent. It's not for food. It's a retainer." Julian leaned over my shoulder. "For who?" "The escorts," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "They're being paid through this catering front. If we can link this account back to Sterling's personal holdings, we have him." As we worked, the boss-employee dynamic began to blur. Julian wasn't the monster I thought he was. He was driven, almost obsessively so, by a need to dismantle Thorne's empire. I asked him why once, during a rare break at 2 a.m. "My sister," he said, his voice tight. "She wasn't like you, Allison. She wasn't sharp. She was vulnerable. She got caught up in Thorne's world 10 years ago. She didn't make it out. She took her own life when the blackmail became too much. I've spent every day since then making sure men like Sterling lose everything." I felt a wave of empathy I hadn't expected. We were both survivors of the same wreckage, just from different sides. "I'm sorry, Julian. I had no idea." "Now you know. That's why I know so much about you. I've been tracking everyone who was ever associated with Thorne, not to hurt them, but to find the ones who could help me burn it all down." We were close. We had the accounts, the names, and the connection to Sterling, but Sterling wasn't a man to be trifled with. On Friday morning, I arrived at my desk to find a plain white envelope. Inside was a single photo, a picture of me from 10 years ago, walking into a hotel with a prominent senator. On the back, a typed note: "Some secrets are worth more than a career. Walk away, Lexi." I showed the photo to Julian. He didn't look surprised. "He knows we're close. This is a desperate move." "He'll release this," I said, my voice trembling. "He'll destroy me. My reputation, my job, everything I've built is gone if this goes public." Julian looked me in the eye. "Only if you let him. We have enough to go to the feds right now, but once we do, the discovery process will be public. Your name might come up. Or we can play his game. We can use what we have to force him into a quiet retirement. He signs over the evidence, closes the accounts, and disappears. You keep your career. I get justice for my sister." "And if he doesn't agree?" I asked. "He will," Julian said, a dark glint in his eyes. "Because I have things on him that are much worse than a vintage photo of a girl in a Chanel dress." I had to make a choice. Do I trust the man who had been terrorizing me with my own past, or do I trust the system that had allowed men like Sterling to thrive? I looked at the photo of Lexi. She looked young, beautiful, and trapped. I didn't want to be her anymore. I wanted to be Allison Vance, the woman who finally fought back. The confrontation happened in a private lounge at an upscale club, the kind of place where men like Sterling felt invincible. Julian had arranged the meeting, claiming he wanted to discuss synergies for a new investment. I was there as the note-taker, hidden in the shadows of the booth. Robert Sterling was a man who exuded a false sense of grandfatherly warmth. He smiled when he saw Julian, but his eyes turned to flint when he saw me. "I see you brought your assistant," Sterling said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I thought we were keeping this between us, Julian." "Allison isn't an assistant," Julian said, sliding a laptop across the table. "She's the architect of your downfall. Take a look." Sterling glanced at the screen. As he scrolled through the evidence, the Cayman accounts, the wire transfers, the logs of his consultants, the color drained from his face. The grandfatherly warmth evaporated, replaced with a cold, predatory stillness. "You think this matters?" Sterling hissed. "I'll destroy her before the first warrant is even signed. One phone call and Lexi is on the front page of every tabloid." I stepped forward into the light. "Do it," I said, my voice steady. "Call them. I've already contacted a journalist I trust. I've given her my full story, on my terms.
The Lexi story is coming out, Robert, but it's not going to be a scandal about a girl. It's going to be an exposé about the man who exploited her and dozens of others. I'm not afraid of that photo anymore. I'm the one holding the camera now. Sterling looked at Julian, then at me. He realized the leverage he thought he had was gone. I had taken the power of the secret away by refusing to let it be a secret anymore. "What do you want?" he muttered. "Everything," Julian said. "The master files, the names of your silent partners, and your immediate resignation from every board you sit on. You move your assets into a blind trust for the victims of Thorne's agency. You do this, and we don't go to the FBI. You get to live out your days in your mansion, forgotten and toothless. You refuse, and you die in a federal prison." The silence hung heavy for a long minute. Finally, Sterling bowed his head. "Fine, give me the documents." The aftermath was a whirlwind. Sterling vanished from the corporate world within a week, citing health reasons. The files Julian obtained were used to quietly dismantle the remains of the blackmail ring. And as for me, I didn't get fired. Julian stayed on as my boss, but the dynamic had changed. He wasn't a ghost from my past anymore, he was a comrade. I did eventually tell my story, not to a tabloid, but in a controlled way that helped other women who had been trapped in similar situations. My hidden history didn't dictate my future performance, it fueled it. I became an advocate for corporate transparency and a mentor for those trying to rebuild their lives. Looking back, Julian knew things about me he shouldn't have known. He knew my name, my habits, and my secrets, but he also knew something I had forgotten, that I was stronger than the shadows I was running from. The past is a different country, yes, but sometimes you have to go back and burn the bridges to finally be free. Thank you for listening to my story. It's a reminder that we are more than our mistakes, and the truth really can set you free. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment below. I'm still curious, what do you do for a living? And have you ever had a boss who knew a little too much? I'll see you in the next one.